Welcome to the Cyber Insights Podcast, brought to you by the Greater Washington, D.C. chapter of ISACA. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins, joined today by my co-host, Mr. Altan Bulut. Our guest today is Mr. Tyler Harding, and we'll be discussing modernizing federal identity management, the role of ICAM in Zero Trust. Let's get into the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Cyber Insights podcast, where we spotlight leaders and initiatives shaping the future of cybersecurity, risk, governance, and privacy. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Altan Bulut. Altan, how are you doing today?
Doing amazing, Jim. I'm really excited for another super exciting episode and dive deep into the world of identity and access management and intricacies of it with our expert guest. So yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, hey, everyone, in today's episode, we turn our focus kind of what Altan was referring to is one of the most fundamental yet complex elements within, the federal cybersecurity world, what we call ICAM, which stands for Identity, Credentialing, and Access Management. And joining us today is Mr. Tyler Harding, the Senior Technical Advisor and ICAM Program Manager in the Office of the DoD Chief Information Officer, or CIO. Tyler brings a wealth of cross-sector experience from IT audit positions at PwC and KPMG to cybersecurity leadership at Amazon and AWS, where he helped operationalize compliance at global scale. He holds multiple certifications. Some of them that are noteworthy would be like the CISA, obviously for the ISACA community, as well as the CISSP, and he even has the FITSI, FITS A or auditor credential, and now leads the charge in modernizing identity systems across the Department of Defense. With a unique blend of commercial innovation and federal mission focus, Tyler is helping reshape how DoD secures digital identities in an era where identity is the new perimeter. Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me. Excited to
Yeah,
be here.
we're super excited to have you here and participating in today's episode. Tyler, what we usually like to do in the first part of the show is to kind of have the guest maybe provide a little bit of background in terms of themselves, in terms of, I kind of alluded to it relative to it in the introduction, but could you spend a couple minutes and just kind of, provide kind of your trajectory in terms of your professional development, your career over the last 2 or 3 decades, maybe in your 30
Sure.
second elevator speech?
Sure. I like to refer to myself as a recovering IT auditor. I started my career many, many years ago, as a financial auditor, understood, the financial audit processes, and then matured to IT audit. And along the way, collected, I don't know, probably a dozen certifications. Some of them that you called out, like the CISA, the CISSP, the Federal IT Security Professional, and many more. It was really a great journey working through various, audit organizations. And about, 6 years ago, I was lucky enough to be invited to join AWS as their DoD security and compliance manager. And that was after about a 2.5 decade career, auditing DoD, the intelligence community, and federal civilian agencies. So it really opened my ideas and eyes to a new field, which is really like solving security and solving audit challenges and answering questions like, how do we build trust? And we do it obviously in some ways like some type of attestation engagement. So our financial auditors and IT auditors have probably heard of a systems and organizational controls report, or SOC. And there's one SOC 1 for like financial audit reliance. There's when I was with a cloud provider, AWS, we focused a lot of effort on our SOC 2 report and those types of controls that go into a standard, AI CPA, security, privacy, confidentiality, integrity, availability, their trust service principles under SOC 2. And we also did ISO 27001, 27002, which is the international certification dealing with information security management and building a security program using the international standards. So it was really a broad experience, and I was very lucky to have that all brought together. And about 9 months ago, I landed at DoD CIO. I was invited to join a wonderful organization and focus on helping them do really two things. One was improve their identity management program, which is called ICAM, Identity Credential and Access Management. And the other half of my job is leading the CIO's audit remediation. So you wouldn't, out of the gate, think there's a lot of overlap between the two different initiatives, but there really is. And so I've spent the better part of the last 9 months focusing on, how do we remediate a significant number of IT audit challenges and understanding those challenges with the lens of identity management and the life cycle of identity, which we kind of refer to the life cycle as joiners, so new employees, new contractors, movers, which is we have a very dynamic organization within DoD. People on average change jobs about every 2 years. They don't necessarily leave DoD, but they move to different roles, different organizations. And then, of course, leavers, people who actually depart, or they're contract employees. And we even have what we call personas. Personas meaning like you can be a DoD employee, but you may stop being involved with the National Guard. So you have an employee as a civilian, and then you have an employee, very likely, possibly, yeah, I'm a member of the military as the National Guard. You can be a contractor and then also have this military persona. So you get some really levels of complications that we don't see necessarily or we don't see frequently in the civilian space. So it's been really a fun and a challenge, working with DoD to help solve these challenges of identity management.
Understood. Understood. So maybe we can step back for a moment.
Mhm. Sure.
We've used the term ICAM. I thought
Mhm.
I'd lay maybe for our audience, if they've not heard of it before or not
Mhm.
aware of what it represents, would you mind spending a few minutes and just talking about what is ICAM, especially within the federal context, maybe some of the key pillars, any strategic goals that it has,
Mhm.
just maybe provide
Sure.
kind of a level set
Sure.
definition.
So, I know ICAM stands for identity, the credential, and then access management. And when we're doing something a bit unique in the federal space, and that is that we are putting identities on physical tokens. And so in the federal civilian, they call it a PIV card or a PIV card. In the DoD space, we call it credential, a CAC card, common access card. And on that card, there's a chip, and that chip contains PKI credentials. And it's not just one cert. There's multiple certs, on that card, and they contain, biographical information about you. Such that they could prove your identity, physically, like when I walk up to a turnstile in DoD, and present my badge, there's information on that card that a guard at the entrance can see, validates my identity. It's like, yep, that's really Mr. Harding. And so again, all of that information is wrapped in there. But there's also your logical access. So you have information about your organization that you belong to, their email address, and, sub-organization, and a lot of additional details. But these details are really key because they allow you to manage access to applications. And so that's where we get to the access management part, is like the access. Again, as with anything, certificates are not valid indefinitely. They have a lifespan. So you may be involved within DoD for a number of years, but they have to manage those certificates on your badge, and you have to periodically get them refreshed with newer certificates as well as the capabilities. A big effort, today is thinking about post-quantum encryption. We have the risk we've seen in the commercial space, post-quantum computing with Microsoft, Google, and some other organizations, IBM, announcing it's like, hey, we've got this post-quantum computer, and we have a risk in the future as the capabilities increase that these certificates, the traditional public-private key, which the strength of is based on the work factors, like how many years does it take to break that key pair. And so that's one aspect that's a bit unique with credential management is like we want to make sure that our credentials are very strong and have very high assurance,
Mhm.
to your point. There's a lot of other aspects of the federal ICAM that's slightly nuanced in DoD. That is, not typical of all organizations, just because of the how we use our badges, and good or bad, we have multiple badges. I wish we could say we'd only had one, but we have different levels of sensitivity, as folks probably know. There's an unclassified network, and then there's a classified network, or there's multiple networks. Let's put it that way. So yeah, so credential ICAM, again, what's unique to all of these networks is your human identity and your human persona, and so you carry that with you both physically on a badge, and then of course, logically when you interact with different networks in DoD.
Does ICAM as a program or a platform change depending upon whether you're on-prem or you're in the cloud? Are there differences there, or do you look at it as kind of just one holistic environment in which ICAM applies equally?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We, look at it. It doesn't change when you go across, identity and how you identify yourself. Now, some of the technology, may be different for what we call the non-persona entity. So, what devices, containers, services. That's very much tied to our zero trust initiative. But I think your question was more about the human identity. The human identity does not change. We select tools that are interoperable, and the primary protocols are either SAML or OAuth, and OpenID Connect, and some other open standards that enable identity information to be shared across different platforms. So you're not wed to like a Windows platform and like Kerberos. The ICAM is really trying to be vendor neutral and open standards so that it is not just used for network authentication, which is what we call certificate-based authentication predominantly, but we can also use it for application and access to data, more importantly. So that's really where our vision and focus is on how do we achieve fine-grained access control.
So that brings up then an interesting point, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about supporting legacy systems. There are, I'm sure, older systems that don't necessarily use SAML or OAuth or have capabilities. How do you integrate in those kind of environments?
Yeah, that is our one of our biggest challenges, and we've had to use, middleware, particularly for like the mainframes, because mainframes are using IDs, and good or bad. The DoD has every flavor of mainframe there probably ever was, RACF, Top Secret, ACF2, and we even have this Unisys, the open Unisys mainframe in running in emulation mode because some of the programs are a bit unique and the department hasn't funded the replacement. So middleware, there's technology. There's like this firewall technology. You've probably heard of F5s that puts a proxy in front of it. There's technology from like Akamai that's able to do capture a login and then do a translation between, let's say, a Windows environment to another either Unix or mainframe environment. And we, again, how do we do it is using directories. There's some amazing technology from Radiant Logic that enables this type of mapping, and it makes it a little bit more efficient for DoD to do this at scale.
Understood. Understood. I think Alton wanted to ask you a question. Alton, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, Tyler, you mentioned that you're a recovering IT auditor, right? So,
Yes.
as a current IT auditor, I wanted to get your perspective on like how does that background inform your view on the centrality on ICAM, and
So,
what do
so
you
it,
see the primary challenges in organizations meeting the requirements around it? What
so,
more common ones maybe?
right. So One of the things that I think when you have a background as an IT auditor, you understand what auditors need to gain assurance that an information system is safe, trusted, produces reliable information. It starts with identity, right? And so with the DoD program, we have a number of IT audit findings. As it's been well publicized by the OIG, we've failed, I don't know, more than 10 years of audits. And one of the reoccurring themes is management of accounts. How are we managing accounts? Sadly, there's a paper form that a person fills out for an access request, and it has to be approved, and it identifies the type of access the user has. Well, we sadly have too many of those types of findings. So when we go to replace and move from a paper-based form to an automated form, the auditor in me goes, well, hey, we need to have these types of evidence of request, evidence of review, evidence of approval by a data owner, an application owner. You have to make sure that, oh, yes, we have the appropriate security clearance. Oh, yes, the person completed his annual information security awareness training. And of course, we have to make sure when we grant access, we don't create a segregation of duties. So all of these like 5 things I just listed here are things that are in my mind as an IT auditor. Okay, we need to have a clear audit trail. And we need to be able to produce that audit trail in a consumable format for an IT auditor, such that if we have 100 users, we could run a report and say, well, all these 5 conditions are met for 100 users, except for these items, and we're following up with those users. And if they don't take their annual security awareness training, we're going to take away their access or whatever the appropriate repercussion would be. But for me, as a recovering IT auditor, I think of what are the auditor needs. And so when we devise a solution, when we build policy, when we write requirements, we're thinking of the one of the stakeholders, which is the IT audit community. And I'll give you another example. We're driving towards a systems and organizational controls report for our ICAM service providers. And we're doing this specifically because we are moving from a very distributed environment. And let's say for giggles, let's say the U.S. Army has 50 financial systems, to make their, produce their financial statements. Well, we're taking those 50 financial systems and then we're consolidating them onto a common platform. And as we go onto that common platform, we want the auditors to rely upon this ICAM infrastructure to do their audit rather than auditing the 50 individual business applications. And so as we go to develop the SOC 1 report, all of the things that we did as an IT auditor, leveraging FISCAM and a lot of the ID practices or IT practices from like COBIT, what makes sense to include them in that SOC 1 report? Because that's going to be an auditor need, and let's try to anticipate that need such that we can achieve the goal of audit one time and reuse the results, many times, and a simple thing. So with that kind of thinking ahead and trying to look around corners is what I'm trying to do with our ICAM program. And the IT audit training and all the stuff that I learned from my ISACA has I've been invaluable as we try to work towards being efficient and being secure.
Awesome. Also, I wanted to ask, like, you probably encountered that a lot. When you interact with oddities, there's that background understand that a lot of things are done for the auditor's needs in a way, like not necessarily. A lot of people don't seem to have that um, deep understanding. I don't know if that's a good way to put it. That controls are done for for their
Yeah, so
actual
I think
purpose,
that
but
that
to
too.
satisfy the auditor's requirements. Like, how do you? What tips do you have maybe for auditors to uh, get across some of those misperceptions in a way? Like people seem to
Well,
perceive
I
it as
think
a
when you think of the
burden
audit
in a way.
life cycle,
No.
when you think of the audit life cycle, that initial meeting with leadership and understanding what are you trying to achieve, what are the outcomes you're looking to gain reliance.
Mm.
There's a disconnect in communications within DoD, And that disconnect often results in, I would say, findings that aren't really warranted, maybe. The auditor goes down a path and the management doesn't realize that, oh, the auditor didn't get the right information until it's almost like too late.
Mhm.
So I would say communicating early and often, having, touch points, with management is really key up front to avoid, have an efficient audit and having a positive inspector general and management relationships. Sometimes relationships really break down because of communication, and things get written that aren't entirely accurate or don't provide like the whole picture that's balanced, for stakeholders in the public.
Mm. Very helpful.
Yeah. So communication.
Thank
Awesome,
you.
awesome. So, hey, talk to us a little bit about the core components of ICAM, right? So, I mean, obviously identity, credentialing, access management.
Right.
Um, if you had to like explain to somebody, how is it kind of constructed? What is it made up of? Could you like
Sure.
in the
So,
30
so
second
there's
elevator speech provide some context?
So right. So in ICAM infrastructure in our mind, has three core elements. You're going to have a directory of users, devices, processes, basically a directory of IDs. And so that's kind of like the first step. And we typically use an IDP for an identity, provider, an IDP. As a part of that, we have to solve the MLJ problem, which we refer to as mover, leaver, joiner. Problem. And so there is a concept of identity lifecycle. So there's an IGA, which is identity governance and administration. So that product interacts with the directory, that IDP, and that helps us keep track of steps that I'd say an access request should follow. So it provides automation in the steps of, okay, for this particular application, you have a security clearance, you've had completed your training, you're a member of this organization, and because of the level and security clearance, you automatically have access to this application. And so this IGA product can provision and deprovision based on changes in a user's attributes. And an attribute could be, your organization, it could be your citizenship, it could be, the date you leave. So the IGA is a critical. So we got the directory, we have an IGA, and the third element is a directory of a user's attribute. And we use the term master user record. And a master user record is a little bit of a misnomer because it's not a single record, and it's not like a single row of a person's identity. It's actually all of the capabilities, or we use the term entitlements, that a user has for every application. So let's say you're a new user, you join the Army, and you happen to have a logistics function. So again, in this scenario, you would have access, you'd have a record in your master user record that, hey, you're a member of the Army, you've got a certain security clearance, you have a certain citizenship, you're a member of a logistics group, and because of these attributes, you would thus be provisioned access to specific applications. And each application has a list of roles and capabilities. Well, all of those roles and capabilities would actually be stored in this, what we call a master user record. It's really a directory. And so it's really a kind of a misnomer to call it a single record because there's multiple records. But
Mhm.
this is very powerful because by storing all of those capabilities in a directory, we can do analysis and say, does this user with these capabilities create any potential segregation of duties? And we can actually run reports on it. And for us in DoD, this is a big deal because not only do we want to track the identity, but we want to see what did he or she has access to, and would that create any potential conflicts with their appropriate business functions. And again, not all applications are financial in nature or logistics in nature or HR in nature, but we need to be sensitive to it. And so we literally have the capability now to run these types of reports to identify potential conflicts. And again, we're working very hard with our comptroller partners and the OIG to resolve our material weaknesses in these two key areas. So you
Understood.
ask your question, what makes an identity provider? So you have an IDP, you have an IGA, and then you have a master user record. Those are the three elements of an ICAM.
Got it. Understood. Understood. So, Tyler, there's in most environments, when we talk about programs, there's usually authoritative sources. If you're dealing with
Sure.
FedRAMP, you can go out to the FedRAMP website, a
Right.
GSA, and you can pull down all the documentation. How does that play out in ICAM? Does NIST publish
Yeah.
information? Does ISO publish information? Where do you go if you're learning about ICAM for the first time and you want to learn about the master user record and you want to learn about the IDP and those different types of things? Are there
Yeah.
source authoritative documents that you can point people to?
They are. There are. And so all of our infrastructure designs, reference architecture, reference sets, link back to NIST 863. There's an A, B, and a C, and that really talks to the identity management. And we think about three elements with identity. We think first about how strong is the identity. So is it username and password? It's a fairly weak identity, and NIST assigns it a level 1. If you have username, password, and a second factor, like a one-time password, or maybe you use a FIDO token, something like that, that you're able to be a level 2, provider. So they refer to as identity attribute level, IAL is the acronym. And then the highest level is when you have a physical hardware token versus a soft token. You can be IAL3, and that's what we require for use within DoD is a highest level of assurance. They call it very high assurance for identity, and so that's IAL level 3. The second aspect I mentioned, there was three, is like, how do you authenticate? And just like we do with identity, where there's three levels, the highest level in the NIST model is very high confidence, and so it's called AAL3. And again, similar to differences where you're using certificate-based authentication or other forms of authentication, they have appropriate ratings, and NIST provides examples, of it. Um, and the very last element deals with federation, and so there's a federation assurance level 1, 2, and 3. And typical fashion, DoD requires level 3 authentication or federation. And so we can use these values to determine access to applications. And based on risk and sensitivity, like you follow the risk management framework, we can assign values for identity, authentication, and federation. And so that's really a big deal in our policy side of our ICAM program.
So, real quickly, I'm going to turn it over to Alton. He wanted to ask you another question, but I do want to
Sure.
ask, you brought up federation. And so, in
Yeah.
case our audience has maybe heard it as a buzzword, but doesn't really understand what that is, can you provide context to what does that
Sure.
actually mean? Where does it apply?
So federation is the idea of linking directories. In really large organizations, it may not be feasible to put all of identities into a single directory. So, DoD has a little over 3.5 million, employees, contractors, and servicemen. With such a large population, we've had to identify a number of different service providers. So, an example of a service provider is Army provides a central directory for all of its, active duty, reservists, and National Guard. The same thing for the Air Force, same thing for the Navy. We have in the Fourth Estate, we have DISA. They maintain a directory for all of the Fourth Estate. We have some directories that we need to support for the intelligence community, and so forth. So we have a challenge of we have lots of directories, but we don't want a person's persona to be copied, from one directory to the next, because that's expensive from a software licensing perspective, not good efficiency. So a way that we're able to be more efficient is to allow different organizations to trust one another. And so when we connect two different directories, we refer to that as federation. Now, there's different architectures that you can do. One architecture is the concept of a mesh, where every directory connects to every other directory. As the number grows, that's pretty messy because you get that n times n minus one problem. And in a large organization like DoD, that quickly becomes unmanageable. It's just not a problem. So there's another architecture that is referred to as a hub and a spoke. And the hub and the spoke has some real advantages, where you stand up a central directory, and you can think of it almost like as a traffic cop in a circle. And every directory that you allow it to connect, so Army, Navy, Air Force, and other components all connect to a directory. And this way, if something ever goes wrong from a cybersecurity perspective, you can unconnect the directory. If one provider becomes untrusted for some unknown reason, you can disconnect them, but you still allow the federation, the other partners, to remain effective. And that gives you some great visibility from an audit log, transaction is like where identity is going across what we call the hub, right? And so for auditors that haven't heard of this, is again a hub and a spoke, just like a wheel on a bicycle. The hub is a central directory that basically contains pointers for user IDs, in our case, or identities, not just users, to other directories. And so it's almost like DNS might be a good analogy. So that's a key part, federation, with our large environment in DoD.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate that. Alton?
So, I wanted to ask about the identity lifecycle management for non-person identities or non-person entities. How does that process look like? And especially when we compare to like human lifecycle processes like joiner, mover, lever,
Yeah,
overall.
it's really complicated, in the sense because with non-person identities, you have different types of devices, right? You have mobile devices. You have, a mobile device might be deployed, 3 years. And so you can put a certificate on it and manage it that way. But then you have devices that are very short-lived, like containers,
Mm,
right? They're spun up, they're spun down. And those types of devices may have a lifespan of just a day or less.
mm,
So we don't use the same technology for managing these disparate mobile device versus a piece of software in the cloud. But we do have to be smart about how we put those certificates into a directory and register them and have that life cycle. So we don't necessarily have a mover challenge like you might think. We don't typically move mobile devices from one org to another org. They typically stay with the organization that purchased them. Not that it can't be done, but that's an aspect. So a lot of different technology is involved on the non-person entity side, but we're working towards solving that problem, because it's a very challenging one, to be able to manage certificates at the scale that DoD does.
mm. And also, some cloud service providers have the concept of roles in addition to users, right? You can assume the role for a
Mhm.
while, you get the temporary credentials from some token service.
Yes,
You
yeah,
do perform the task and then you release. I mean, it automatically
right.
expires. So how does that? Uh,
Yeah, so
yeah.
again, there's specific tools that manage, what I want to call it temporary privileged access, that allows you to, I want to say, escalate your privileges from an ordinary user to a privileged user, and then it's time bound, access where it returns back. And again, that is not always core to what we call an ICAM infrastructure because it's very technology dependent, right? There's products that work very well on the Windows side, which is different some of the products that work on the Unix, and then of course in our cloud service providers. So this privileged access management PAM is an area that we're looking to integrate into our ICAM service provider offerings, but we're not. I'll be fully honest, we're not fully there, yet.
Hmm. And also a quick follow-up on the non-person identity or entity side. You mentioned that there are three levels of authentication strengths for regular
Correct.
human identities. Do we have any corresponding levels of strength when it comes to non-person identity authentication?
There is the requirements to my knowledge do not differ,
Mm,
from uh, in terms of like how you authenticate and how you trust. Um, One of the things that is considering is that, there's attributes about a non-person entity that you can consider that can influence, that. Where is it coming, position, timing, device
Validation.
health characteristics. We have a whole program called Comply to Connect, and evaluates a device or a process and then allows it to, connect to the broader network.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So, but yes, it's an emerging area, and I'll be perfectly honest. Most of my focus has been solving the human side of the mover, leaver, joiner, attribute, and a future phase would be solving the non-person entity.
Absolutely.
Understood. Understood. Okay, hey Tyler, we like guests to when they come on to look into their crystal ball and try to predict, where things are headed. What do
Mhm.
you think's next for the ICAM program, at least in the federal and the defense sectors? Do you see any kind of future trends that you're watching and looking out for that might have impact with regard to the program?
I think the probably the biggest thing for us in terms of the future trends is driving adoption. You can stand up an infrastructure, but that does not mean that that infrastructure is being used. And so we are looking at ways of how to accelerate the adoption of an ICAM infrastructure. And how do we automate that? Today, the process of adding an application to an ICAM and to having it enabled, it is very time intensive. It can take, 6 weeks to 6 months. And we're looking to say, how can we do this faster? And so I think we're really looking to industry for solutions to go from, hey, here's a network or an entire network enclave. How do we onboard that entire network enclave? And so, that's a different approach versus the one by one approach that we have today. To give you a sense of the size of the problem, um, within DoD, to our knowledge, we have over 10,000 applications, across DoD. And when you're onboarding only a few dozen per month, you're not making a dent in the big problem. So we're really looking at solutions to onboard entire networks and to figure out how to really accelerate that process so we can do hundreds per month, not a couple dozen.
Do you think automation or maybe even AI plays a role in any of that as you're looking into the future?
It does. Definitely AI connectors. As applications modernize and have APIs available to them, the API concept is probably like the magic key. Again, we have a lot of legacy applications. And so once APIs are available, they call it a REST API, then we'll be able to really be turnkey to adoption. But until we have an API available, we're looking for other methods, to drive adoption and use. So ultimately, we do a better job at managing the identity lifecycle.
Understood. Understood. What about other emerging technologies? You mentioned post-quantum. Obviously, that's going to have huge impacts on the cryptographic world or cryptographic community.
Sure.
Are you guys looking at like behavioral biometrics? Are there other, I don't know, nanotechnology, whatever. I just am
Mhm.
trying to think,
Yeah.
what about some of these other spaces? How do you anticipate they're going to impact or affect,
Mhm.
the ICAM world?
Yeah, well, the changes in credentials is really going to be a big one because we're going to have to do it in like a two-step process, where we modernize and roll out stronger keys that are more cryptographically resistant. But we're also going to have to be able to support legacy apps because with a large portfolio of applications, not everything can be using. You can't just like turn the switch and say, okay, let's go post-quantum. And if you roll out post-quantum, certificates, What about those legacy applications? So we're going to have to figure out this transition phase. And again, this is a big area for industry can help DoD is how do you manage a hybrid where you have what I want to call classic encryption technologies for identity, and then of course post quantum. And then, with this hybrid, we have all sorts of challenges. How large do we have enough storage capability on our, PIV cards, on our CAC cards? Because DoD doesn't work in an isolation, right? DoD interfaces with the rest of the federal government, and of course, we accept their PIV credentials. It's going to be a big challenge. And in terms of trends of how that transition process, how does that look like in organizations that have solved it? We can certainly learn from them.
What kind of hurdles do you run into in terms of ICAM? Thinking about things like cultural resistance, governance challenges, complexity. How do all of these
Yeah,
um,
I think
impact
the
you?
biggest challenges aren't really um, technology. I think the biggest challenges are people. Why should I prioritize modernizing my application and having an API? If I'm a program owner and I have a particular mission, what does centralized identity add for me? And from my perspective, if I was sitting in the seat of an application owner, I'd say, hey, people can get access faster. By onboarding to an ICAM, you're going to have greater, your employees are going to be able to access your application more quickly. No longer do they have to fill out this paper form and then shuffle around and get four different signatures. There's going to be an automated workflow, and that's really that benefit of efficiency that you join a new organization. Maybe you move from, logistics group A to logistics group B. And like, hey, I'm here. I'm ready to start my new job. Let me go. Well, that person gets access within 24 hours versus, week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. So efficiency is a big thing. By having a centralized provider, we try to emphasize that you can inherit these enterprise services. So you're going to have capabilities that you're not going to do by doing it at an application level. You won't have the capabilities, but by providing it to the enterprise for service provider, they can take a number of security controls off your desk. So we've done the analysis and said, hey, by the way, if you adopt ICAM, all of a sudden, some number between 30 and 70, you can rely upon or inherit controls from the service provider, so you don't have to deal with it. All you have to do is manage roles and that access. You don't have to manage IDs because we're going to base a person's access based upon the automated workflow approval process. And when they leave their organization, guess what? We're going to detect that change in their attribute, and within 24 hours, we're going to remove their access. So there's benefits to the application owner, and the challenge is convincing them that the benefits exceed the cost of adoption.
Understood. Understood. I think Alton had another follow-on question or a different
Sure.
question.
Yeah, around the emerging technologies, I wanted to bring the focus around the agentic AI. That the last year has been the focus around the AI agents has been very heavy in the security community. I wanted to get your perspective on like as they become more and more autonomous and become more common, everything seems to have an AI and especially agentic AI component now. Do you think those agents deserve their own distinct identity construct, maybe somewhere in
Hmm.
between the source account and human account? Like, what do you think the future of ICAM
Yeah, I think
has?
I think for any type of automated process, whether it's AI driven or robotic process automation, it has to have its own identity
Hmm.
um, to manage, and that's the way it's managed today. Is we have a similar initiative called Zero Trust that has a number of different pillars. One of the pillars is like the user pillar. And again, anything that the user does and initiates, it's going to require its own process ID.
Hmm.
And so it's a bit it's the exact opposite of single sign-on. Let's say it's the user experience. We have areas for improvement. And because we're moving to zero trust, the user experience, because there is no single sign-on like we have in traditional networks, like Windows networks, right, that rely upon LDAP. Every time a new thing is launched, you have to re-authenticate and provide credentials. So that's our approach. It's the most secure approach, in my opinion.
Especially when we think about the decision making of an AI agent, like, do you
Mhm.
think there should be a human owner or ultimate responsibility owner in that? Like,
Well,
what,
if there's an
what,
AI agent that's going to run, it's going to, if we have a use case that is initiated by an end user, then that would, of course, require its own process ID and launch. And again, it would be running, if I started an AI agent, it would run under my ID on, say, my desktop or on my server if I launched it, process from a server. Now, if it was an AI agent that was translating data between two systems, that would have a traditional type of service account. Even though it has logic and it does matching, it has like its own certificate and identity. So I don't know, Alton, did I get to your
yeah, yeah,
question?
yeah. I mean, again, like, I know it's kind of an emerging area on its own, like, even distinct from AI itself, like having
It
the
is. It is.
autonomy is a big deal.
Yeah.
Uh,
And we have some unique use cases because of the data that we have. Sometimes when you take unclassified data and you aggregate it together, you run the risk of data in aggregation rising to a higher level, stepping up from unclass to secret, or taking unclassified public data in aggregate rising to CUI.
yeah,
So we have some unique risks that we have to solve, and I don't think that problem has been solved yet.
yeah.
So Tyler, kind of finishing out this section on emerging technologies and
Mhm,
also just kind of talking about the future.
mhm,
Let's talk about your experience in terms of deployment, right? So what are some of the lessons learned that you've, takeaways, things like that that you can articulate that so that if our audience was listening and they were thinking about, ICAM and how they're going to implement it,
mhm.
what are some of the things they should kind of look out for?
Yeah, that's a good question. Adopting and onboarding is a big challenge. Just because you build it doesn't mean they come. So communication to the audience is key. Identifying those benefits of why should they make this investment. Getting leadership behind the initiative is key. Um, I would always pick some quick wins to demonstrate that your technology works and your ideas, can be valued. So some applications are easier to onboard than others. So take those type of applications, up first. Prove to the community that it works, so that you have those success stories. Try to quantify it using metrics. So communication, governance, management buy-in, metrics that are outcome based, showing quantifying savings. We have a couple use cases where we were able to show with one organization. They were onboarding about 42,000 individuals per week. And we were able to take that 42,000, come up with an average. How long did it take before they were fully enabled to up and do their job? And taking those number of hours that they had to wait for the whole paper-based process, and then taking it by basic simple math. We were in the millions of dollars in savings because of ICAM, and we were able to put those numbers forward. People were like, "Wow, we didn't realize how challenged we were, and by adopting this infrastructure, look how more efficient we can become." And this mover problem is something that's not just unique to DoD. All organizations have it. So solving that mover problem and quantifying those metrics get people behind you. Uh, when you think to like adoption, understanding the different types of architectures is really key. And so, the basic documentation, we have a concept of enablement teams. Enablement teams are teams that are well versed with a particular technology and a particular platform. And they're able to then onboard applications that used to take months in a few weeks. So that's something that I would say is a best practice. If you're able to onboard like enclaves, let's say we have a group of Unix applications that are similar in design, onboarding them en masse rather than trying to do one by one by one. So again, you get a lot more bang for your buck for each effort. And then I would say the ERP applications, I'd probably save them for last. The ERPs, like when I say ERPs, so the SAP, the Oracles, the PeopleSofts, those applications do not always have REST APIs available. So the community is building tools and capabilities, but I would say it's more immature, today. So in terms of your life cycle, I wouldn't try to SAP with R3 or R4 is not the first application I'd put on my list. I would actually save it for later because of just where they are in the maturity life cycle. Web-based applications, that support, OAuth, SAML, much, much easier, and you'll see a higher return on your investment early on to be successful. So
Understood.
yeah, there's a lot but again, all backs to communication, how you outreach, and then how do you prioritize, schedule, and communicate, building tools, publishing those tools. And when I say tools, it's like the business process. It doesn't always mean technology.
So those are all really, really strong and good best practices. Thank you. You did also bring up metrics, and it did
Yeah.
make me think about like, okay, so let's say someone's followed all your best practice, they've implemented it. What should they be measuring? What's important? You talked about a couple. You talked about money as one way to
Mhm.
kind of demonstrate efficiencies. Are there other
Yep.
metrics that you would suggest using that are
So
powerful?
I would say metrics. We have metrics regarding like segregation of duties, right? Because we want to demonstrate to our auditors that we have appropriate risk management. So, we have the capability to say that, hey, here's a conflict exists, but, we've looked at the conflict, and identified compensating controls and we've risk accepted it. So we track those risk acceptances. We review them on a regular basis. So there's metrics around that. Metrics of just like how many people are actually using our tool or capability. So metrics related to adoption is really a good one because you can authenticate to an app typically one of two ways. You can authenticate being using the ICAM infrastructure in that directory, or you may be able to backdoor it and go through the legacy application way. We want to kind of stop that. Well, I want to call it backdoor or traditional authentication. We want to use the directory because it provides us enhanced audit logging capabilities and where they come from, making sure they attribute. So we measure metrics related to is our let's say our ICAM infrastructure the only door, or are there other doors still available to the end user? So again, driving towards adoption is one of them. Again, we have different use cases, not just like what I want to call the individual worker, within, but we also have in DoD, external customers. So a customer could be a spouse, a dependent of an active duty military member that needs like, medical benefits. And so we have retirees, that they have, capabilities, better benefits with the VA, or benefits, other military type of benefits. And so we've have solutions that measure, the use of those benefits. We measure a creation of new accounts. We have a multi-factor authentication solution that replaces the old user ID and password called MyAuth. And it's relatively new. And so we're tracking as people migrate from the old method to the new method, again, measuring adoption. So again, commercially, I would say all organizations, our metrics are not that special, but we have use cases and we measure metrics associated with different types of use.
Awesome. Awesome. Alton?
So I wanted to ask about the qualifications and trainings around this. Like, what kind of skill-based trainings or maybe certifications would you recommend for both ICAM management professionals and the auditors themselves to think about either now or going forward?
Yeah, I get that's a good question. Um, I'd say from the audit perspective, the CISA is a great one. The CISSP provides a great foundational knowledge about identity and credential management. When you get towards more the implementer, you get into a lot of product specific. I'm not aware of generic certifications. We have in the identity provider space, there's 4 or 5 large ones. So you have Okta. Has a platform as a service or software as a service type of capability. There are certifications that are specific to Okta. Ping Identity is another provider of directories that has capabilities. Akamai is another offers capabilities in this. So that gives you the directory space. In the IGA space, there's 2 leading providers, SailPoint and Saviynt. And so both of those products have their own certifications that you can be a technology specialist. And then, of course, in the master user record space, I'm only aware of one provider called Radiant Logic. There may be more. I just haven't personally interacted with them. But again, they have their own, again, it's all directory based. Most of them all support a standard, but they all have configuration and tweaks. Different providers have different levels. I'm going to call adapters or connectors. So how do you connect to an API? How do you configure it and set it up? And so forth. So you get into that space. And then when you jump over to the cloud side, then Google, Amazon, Google, yeah, Amazon, AWS, and Microsoft Azure have their own specific products and connectors. So that's and of course Microsoft spans both on-prem and in the cloud. So there's like so many deep. It's really hard to give you an answer that there's any one certification that would allow you to transcend all of these identities. I'm not personally aware of anyone. Everyone is very much product focused because a lot of the products today do more than one function. They're not just a directory, but they also have an IGA capability to manage the life cycle. And many of them also have capabilities that extend over into the management of attributes. So.
What I've seen is most general purpose certifications that have ICAM minutes or maybe identity access management as more broadly called
Mm.
under like security certifications, like
Yeah,
as one big domain,
right.
new perimeter as it's called, like identity.
Yeah,
So as you mentioned, like CISSP obviously is huge and
right.
the other security
Yeah, you
focus.
can go down many routes. When you go to the perimeter space, right,
Uh,
there's so much more, that can be done. But again,
yeah,
where I've been really focused on is solving the human side at
yeah.
this stage.
Hey, Tyler,
Sure.
so you talked about some of the NIST guidance earlier, 863. Are there other resources that audience members could look at to learn more about ICAM? If you had
CISA, the organization,
CISA,
has
okay.
a whole, that federal organization has a whole great website about identity management. They called it IDAM. And so there's a lot of great content about reference architecture and reference designs that the organization CISA put out there. So that's a great resource. The education community actually has information about federation and federation frameworks. NISTA's publication has 2 publications to my knowledge. There's a NISTER, an IR 8149 that talks about federation and the types of security controls that should be employed. So I was like, wow, there is guidance out there. I'm not aware of any ISO 27000 or any type of ISO security certification specific to federation yet. I think it's a newer area and it just hasn't come about. But again, I haven't spent a ton of time, looking at standards beyond, what is the federal stood up and, what does DoD have in place today.
Understood, understood. Any final thoughts that you want to impart? I mean, like, you've been a great interview, by the way. Thanks for coming in and sharing all this really good information. Someone wants to learn more about it, but beyond the resources, any other recommendations you can provide to our audience members that want to kind of delve deeper into ICAM?
Um, yeah, well, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. If it's public content, happy to share. Identity. I'll take away is identity is everything. If you don't have strong identity, you can't have good security. And so identity is really going to be form the pillar of zero trust. It's the basis of all types of trust with information systems and networks. So it's really essential there. Again, I don't have a great this is one shop, place all. I rely extensively on ChatGPT and other AI tools and Google, to learn about how do I solve a specific problem. It's a huge field out there, and I'm constantly learning. And I certainly don't consider myself an expert. I think I'm a kind of a jack of all trades. So I'd always say to participants listening to continue to learn, continue to research, participate in conferences, ask questions, because it's just constantly evolving.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's going to bring us to a close on another episode of the Cyber Insights podcast and radio show. We want to provide a sincere thank you to Mr. Tyler Harding for joining us today and sharing his expertise on one of the most pivotal aspects of modern federal cybersecurity, what we refer to as ICAM. Tyler, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
To our listeners, if you're looking to deepen your understanding of ICAM, explore the latest NIST and DoD guidance, or connect with peers, don't forget about ISACA's Greater Washington, D.C. chapter. We have a lot of events and venues that delve into some of these topics from time to time, different conferences, different training opportunities. So be sure to check us out at www.isaca-gwdc.org. Until next time, stay informed, stay secure, and remember, in today's cyber landscape, identity isn't just a gateway, it's the perimeter. See you guys next time. Thanks a lot for joining us. Bye-bye.